Hello, this is The Harboring Light. I'm Mary. I give a conservative perspective about the world around me. So my social media links will be provided along with my Substack, my email, and Buy Me a Coffee link. And Buy Me a Coffee link is a way of supporting the channel if you enjoy my content. So audio platforms, I'm on Audible, Amazon Music, Spotify for podcasters, Overcast, Pocket Cast, Pandora, iHeartRadio, and I'm definitely looking to grow to where you enjoy your podcast content. I am on that. So this episode is about Bob Dylan. I'm going to start out with the background, and then I'm going to do that again with artists that relay to his message, his sound. And then I'm going to talk about his songs and his contribution on Friday. All right, so along with my thoughts, of course. So let's get into this. Okay, so my thoughts about Bob Dylan. I think his music is really interesting. A tapestry, again, of how music, particularly folk music, can speak to the soul and say things and messages and, so to speak, awaken things within people with awareness of what goes on in society and looking at things in a different light with the human condition. And even more so along the lines, I think it's very interesting that Bob Dylan himself had said that he has gotten a lot of inspiration from Woody Guthrie and speaking up and talking about the tolls of the common man and with everyday people face and go throughout their challenges of life, the happiness and the sadness and everything in the tapestry of that. Yes, sweetie. And also, I think it's very, let's go into more depth about the time in which Bob Dylan was a singer and speaking and talking. So the 60s was a very turbulent time. And I think that the movie The Graduate, it sums up the thoughts and particularly the kind of morals, particularly of the youth. So what do I mean by that? So when you go and look at The Graduate, spoiler alert, for people who haven't seen it or know some things about it, but the main character, he's coming back home from college, and he's just drifting around trying to find his way. And the whole idea of within the drifting, he gets lost in who he is per se, and lost in his stance of what he wants to, what the kind of person he wants to be. And so there's this overrunning theme of and am I going to be passive in my life or am I going to be active in my life? And so from my point of view, from him being passive, he gets caught up in with both sides, having a hand stain in these things, and both sides, not coming clean out of these things with having an affair with a married woman, and then the pushing away his love that he realized towards the end that he really loves her, and so to speak, very to say that she symbolizes your hope for the future, and he's pushing it away because he can't come to terms with who he actually wants to be. And this whole notion also with his love interest is very interesting because it talks to the morals of the ideas of tradition as far as women with their stance with marriages, and then how it was an ever present theme and rolling theme from what I gather and what I understand of my great love of history, that the sexual mores, particularly, that let's rethink the idea of marriage and family. Particularly, this whole slippery slope. You don't particularly have to get married to have children. You can or you don't particularly, marriage isn't everything, so to speak. And that men, so to speak, of the mentality of men coming second nature instead of valuing and having honor in the traditions and the timeless traditions of marriage. And, marriage isn't for everyone. And speaking on this about marriage, particularly with the horrible way that they, particularly with the family court situation can happen and all of these things, and then the undeniable incentive of the government of being single and all of these things without tying down or being married. And, towards the end, the two of them, he finally convinces her to be with him, and they walk away and they get on the bus and they just have this distant look in their eyes of what's next. Yes, sweet baby. And I think it's a prime example of the type of era in which Bob Dylan was in. Trying to make sense of all the changes around you and finding your way in it. And then the whole idea of going against tradition and what it means and trying to dispel. And then the problems with, so to speak, reinventing the wheel, being reverse engineerist and things that aren't broken, and the problems of doing that and how that breaks down society and how that makes people, so to speak, lose their way. And it's very interesting within that how you come out of it whole and talking about the breaking down and putting the pieces back together again. And it's very interesting how Bob Dylan does these things in his music. And it really, I appreciate that. And when I listened to Bob Dylan's music when I was early on in preteen and teenage years, it really particularly speaks to the aspects and the ideas of being young and being, particularly when you're teenaged and, trying to find your identity and trying to find your way and where you stand against things and all of that. And it's just very interesting, particularly with all the different artists that's found inspiration from him. And, I'll speak on that more on Wednesday, how it was an is just an overall unified idea of that you want to stand your ground within things and then speak on what you think and try to speak on what you think within that and try to find the hope in the darkness, so to speak. And I think that's what Bob Dylan's music is speaking on for the most part. And, as I go into depth about these things, things will be discovered more on these topics. All right, so here we go. Let's dive into his background. All right. An American folk singer who moved from folk to rock music in the 1960s, Bob Dylan, infusing the lyrics of rock and roll, therefore concerned mostly with boy-girl romantic innuendo, with the intellectualism of classic literature and poetry, hailed as the Shakespeare of his generation. Dylan sold tens of millions of albums, wrote more than 500 songs, recorded by more than 2,000 artists, performed all over the world, and set the standards for lyric writing. He was awarded the Nobel Peace Prize for Literature in 2016. He grew up in the northern West Minnesota mining town of Hibbing, where his father co-owned Zimmerman Furniture and Appliance Co. Taken with the music of Hank Williams, Little Richard, Elvis Presley, and Johnny Ray, he acquired his first guitar in 1955 at age 14, and later as a high school student, played in a series of rock and roll bands. In 1959, just before enrolling in the University of Minnesota in Minneapolis, he served a brief stint playing piano for rising pop star Bobby Vee. While attending college, he discovered the bohemian section of Minneapolis known as Dinky Town. Fascinated by beat poetry and folk singer Woody Guthrie, he began performing folk music in coffee houses, adopting the last name Dylan, after the Welsh poet Dylan Thomas. Now, briefly about Dylan Thomas. He's a New York writer, a Welsh poet and prose writer whose work is known for its comic rhapsody, lit, and pathos. His personal life, punctuated by recklessness, bouts of drinking, was notorious. All right, so moving on. Reckless and determined to meet Guthrie, who was confined to a hospital in New Jersey, he relocated to the East. Arriving in late January 1961, Dylan was greeted by a just typical winter of New York City, as I take it. A survivor at heart, he relied on the generosity of various benefactors who, charmed by his performance at Gertie's Folk City in Greenwich Village, provided meals and shelter. He quickly built a cult following, and within 4 months, he was hired by Harmonica for Harry Belafonte recording section. And to know, I'm going to talk about Harry Belafonte as we go on into this series of folk music, and I think, it highlights and is very interesting about Harry Belafonte bringing light to the Caribbean sound of Caribbean people and the notions behind that and the just the culture and the traditions of the Caribbean life is very interesting, and also his stance and his activism, particularly in how he redefined this notion of he was very classy and noble, particularly in his stance with the civil rights movement and all of this. And then his demeanor was very just worldly, and had a lot of panache within that. All right, so responding to Robert Shelton's, yes, baby, yeah, you look so sweet. The New York Times reviewed one of Dylan's live shows in September 1961. Talent scout producer John Hellman investigated and signed him to Columbia Records. There, Dylan's unkept appearance and roots-oriented song materials earned him the whispered nickname Hammond's Foley. On with Dylan's first album, I will speak on that on more about the details of his music on Friday. His singing voice, a cowboy lament laced with Midwestern pathos, with an obvious nod to Guthrie, co-founded many critics. His quirky voice, which divided parents and children and established him as part of the burgeoning counterculture, a rebel with a cause. Moreover, with his different aspects of his style of music. About this time, Dylan went on to go, and I'll go in more depth about this, with his various aspects of what he was signing and all of this thing with the musical companies. And so he went on with replacing with Harmon with another Columbia producer, Tom Wilson. And then from that, he went on to play on Ed Sullivan, and he did and championed it by the music done by Joan Baez. He made his first appearance in Newport Folk Festival, virtually crowned as the king of folk music. Now, you look so cute, baby. Yeah, you look so, yes. Now, going on, so, he, through the 80s and the 90s. So, in the 90s, he won a Grammy for Best Male Rock Vocal performed by his gospel song, Gotta Serve Somebody. And by 82, when Dylan was inducted into the Songwriters Hall of Fame, his open zeal for Christianity was warned. Well, waning. Oh, thank you, sweetheart. Thank you. In 1985, he participated in the All-Star charity recording We Are the World, which was organized by knowingly Quincy Jones. And he did a tour in 1986, backed by Tom Petty and the Heartbreakers in 1987. And so this tour went on from 1986 to 1987. A year later, he was introduced into the Rock and Roll Hall of Fame, and the Traveling Wilburys, which was cultivated by Dylan, Petty Harrison, Jeff Lynne, and Roy Orbison. So this was a spin-off, them coming together, which links to how the lineage of folk music goes, where people, different singers, band together and they go off and they sing music and sing laments, they little ditties, things of that nature. And I think it's very interesting how they brought that tradition back into the 80s. Alright, so as the 90s drew to a close, Dylan, who was called the greatest poet of the second half of the 20th century by Allen Ginsberg, performed for the Pope at the Vatican, was noted for the Nobel Peace Prize for Literature, received the Kennedy Center of Honor, and was made Commander in the Order of Arts and Letters, which is the highest cultural award presented by the French government. In 1998, in a comeback of sorts, he won 3 Grammy Awards, including an Album of the Year for Time Out of My Mind. Now in 2000, he was honored with a Golden Globe and an Academy Award for Best Original Song for Things Have Changed from the film Wonder Boys. All right, and yes, sweetie, another Grammy for Best Contemporary Folk Album came Dylan's way in 2002 for Love and Theft in 2001. In 2003, he co-wrote and starred in the film Max and Anonymous and began favoring keyboards over guitar in live appearances. The next year, he released what was to be the first in a series of autobiographies, Chronicles, Volume 1. In 2005, No Direction, Home, a documentary directed by Martin Scorsese, appeared on television. 4 hours long, yet covering Dylan's career only up to 1967. It was widely hailed by critics. A soundtrack album that included 26 previously unreleased tracks came out before the documentary aired in 2006. All right. Dylan also received an award for Best Solo Rock Vocal Performance for Someday Baby. And presenting to Dylan Spain's Prince of Asturias Prize for the Arts in 2007, the jury called him a living myth in the history of popular music, and a light for a generation that dreamed of changing the world. In 2008, the Pulitzer Prize Board awarded him a special citation for his profound impact on popular music and American culture. In 2009, Dylan released Together Through Life. And I'll go on into the details about that on Friday. Now, he was still actively performing as he entered his 70s and in the 35th studio album, Tempest, of 2012. Dylan then turned his attention to the so-called Great American Songbook, especially standards recorded by Frank Sinatra. Now, I'll go into more details about these things, and of course on Friday. Dylan continued to receive rewards, including the Presidential Medal of Freedom in 2012. In 2016, he won the Nobel Prize for Literature for, as noted by the prize bestowing Swedish Academy, having created new poetic expressions within great American songs and traditions. And I'm going to wrap this up as I close out. It's just an ever-present example of the power of the spirit, I think particularly folk music, relays this to America. How taking pride in stance of what we value and what we see in our country, what we see in our nation, and talking about it and stepping back and saying, hey, I see these things from my point of view, so I'm gonna put a little spin on it, and I'm just gonna tell you, so to speak, this is the way it is and how it is, and I want to know what you think. And then from that, people unite or, of course, divide from it. And then I think it's even more so to think about how it brings awareness and get people when the rubble of the division comes out of things, it gets people to start talking if they want to, And that's definitely something to think about. All right, so this reaches the end of the Harpering Light. And on Wednesday, I'm going to go into depth about my thoughts on particular artists I think relate to the sound and relate to the messaging per se with how Bob Dylan's music is and why I think they correlate to one another. So tune in, turn up, and definitely take care. And of course, comments, questions, concerns, feedback is greatly appreciated. So reach out to me through email, Substack, X, or you could reach out to me. I think there's a way to reach out to me, but I have to check in that in more details with Buy Me a Coffee too. All right, take care. Bye now.